Aotearoa Good morning. So, Aotearoa New Zealand, it has a lot of similarities with Palestine in that we had a situation of apartheid here in Aotearoa. So, in 1836, the United Tribes signed a document called the Declaration of Independence, or otherwise known as the Whakaputanga. Now, this document was signed, it was sent to New South Wales, it was also sent to the Colonial Office in London. And so it was an acknowledgement that there was a Māori state here in Aotearoa. In response to that, in 1840, the Colonial Office sent the Royal Navy and they sent Lieutenant William Hobson, who would become the first governor of the colonial state of New Zealand. And so there were discrepancies in this document around the word sovereignty and rangatiratanga and different parties' interpretations. So according to the British, they believed that this was giving outright sovereignty to Her Majesty the Queen Victoria, whereas for the rangatira or the chiefs, they just thought that was another chief coming along that would be equal to their authority and wouldn't have authority over the top. And this wasn't explained at the signing. Also, there is discrepancies with, there are two documents which are actually different documents. So you have Te Tiriti o Waitangi and you have the Treaty of Waitangi. Now, in Te Tiriti, it uses the word rangatiratanga, whereas in the Treaty of Waitangi, which didn't have as many signatures, it has the word sovereignty. So this is an issue that's been plaguing our nation for hundreds of years. So Hobson came here to Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and set up the colonial government. By 1863, both parties were at war over real estate and the land wars. So there was Governor George Grey. He brought in 2/3 of the British Army here for what I call real estate acquisition. And they signed up the New Zealand Settlements Act 1863, which authorised the British Army to mass at Pōkeno and then start the invasion of the Waikato. Also, the justification for this was called the Rebellion Suppression Act, which was 1863. Now, this was proposed that it was trying to suppress a rebellion because tangata whenua were in rebellion against the colonial government, when in reality what they were trying to do was just protect their lands. This was their ancestral lands, and they didn't see the need for them to lose their lands or have to sell it. So what had really happened is the Kingitanga movement had decided to avoid selling any more real estate and kind of managed to band together a bunch of iwi so that they would refuse to sell real estate to the colonists because they had no need to. Because the trade between Auckland and the Waikato was quite good, so they could send crops, flour. They had a very good trade network that went out Port Waikato. They traded with Sydney, San Francisco. So they had a big Pacific trade network and also here in Auckland. So after the New Zealand Wars, the colonists had taken large swaths of land all throughout the Waikato, and the Kingitanga movement had been pushed south down to the King Country, and hence the name the King Country. In the 1880s, this is when the alienation of land really stepped up. So what they did is they passed the Borough Councils Act. Now, the thing with the Borough Councils Act is it was jury-rigged so that only citizens of British stock were entitled to stand for local government. So only those who had general real estate. So you couldn't own native land to stand for council. So only at that stage probably only migrants were allowed to, British migrants were entitled to stand for local government. And this is when the legislative theft of real estate really stepped up. So what they did is they initiated the Public Works Act. So say a low-ranking borough councillor, they had the authority to invoke the Public Works Act, and they could basically confiscate large swaths of native land and enrich themselves. So with a lot of legislative theft, the New Zealand Settlements Act, the Public Works Act, and various other government legislation, they managed to take up to 98% of native land. By that stage, the Māori population was decimated. They were estimated at the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi to be in the range of 100,000 people. Within 50 years, they lost 52% of the population, with a death toll of around about 47,000. This is due to warfare, loss of the economy, loss of real estate, and also disease. So colonisation absolutely decimated the tangata whenua. By still leading into the 1960s, Māori were still second-class citizens. So an American chap just released a book recently called No Māori Allowed. It was about the oppression of Māori in the township of Pukekohe. So a Māori person wasn't allowed to go into a movie theatre. They had to go and sit in a certain section of a movie theatre. They were not permitted to go into a bar, so the wahine had to go out into a field. They had to drink their alcohol, beer out in the field. They weren't allowed in the public bar. They weren't allowed to use public toilets. And there was also an organisation out there called the White New Zealand League, which actively oppressed Māori harvest workers that were out there so that they couldn't acquire housing. So most of them kind of lived in kind of little shacks out there on the plantations, and the death toll amongst the children who couldn't get health care. In 1939, the same year we went to war with Germany, the death toll was 30 children in one suburb alone. And this is just Pukekohe. This is not the entire nation. This is just Pukekohe alone. And they died from preventable diseases like diarrhea or just simple diseases that are easily preventable with vaccines today, but they couldn't get medical attention, and they were living basically on earth floors. So still today, we have similar hate groups, anti-Māori hate groups today in the 21st century, even though the White New Zealand League's been disbanded. So we have One New Zealand Foundation, we have Hobson's Pledge, and Hobson's Pledge is a multi-million-dollar industry. Like, they spend $1 million on each city council to suppress the recent Māori wars. Now, recently we had, we tried to get, the local government minister, Nanaia Mahuta, she passed a policy that allowed Māori laws to not be voted down with a simple petition. So what could happen is hate groups like Hobson's Pledge, they could come along and they could petition City Council to void starting a Māori war. So that little indiscretion was shut down, whereas you couldn't shut down an agricultural ward or a business ward. So there are multiple wards within a city council based on certain interests, but they perceived a Māori ward, which was really an Indigenous rights ward, as race-based privilege, which it's not. It's not race-based privilege, because when the Borough Councils Act first started in the 1880s, as I explained to you before, that there was only colonial or people of British stock could stand in city council, so they've had 100 years of basically only being British New Zealanders that were able to stand for local government. So what this does is the Māori wards, it really desegregates local government so that Māori get to participate. So there's many councils all throughout Aotearoa that have never ever in over 100 years had any Māori representation at all. So going into the 21st century, we're still having issues for tangata whenua. So we have the criminal justice estate. We have about 52% of Māoridom make up the prison population. We're also having situations with an organisation called Oranga Tamariki, where what they're doing is they're doing without notice child uplifts. So a mother could be giving birth to a child, a social worker can go to the family court, apply for a without notice child uplift. So the mother doesn't even know that this legal process is happening in the background in a family court somewhere where the state is taking their child. They can't contest it, there's nothing they can do, and then the social worker turns up with without notice child uplift. Where the social worker could easily apply, and Oranga Tamariki could easily apply for with notice child uplifts. You know, I accept there are some poor parents out there, but still even those parents deserve to have a with notice child uplift where they get to find out that there's a court process in place and then they can challenge that with a lawyer. Whereas without notice, they're unaware, and the moment the baby's born, it's snatched off them by the state, and then they never see that child for the rest of their lives. So, Annette wanted me to explain that there are some parallels between tangata whenua and also the Palestinian people, and how both nations are treating children. So she just asked me to read this out to you. We call upon the New Zealand government to use all available means to pressure the Israeli government to end the detention and abuse of Palestinian children. We ask that they make a public statement of intent to take meaningful action, including through international bodies, to ensure the Israeli government acts in accordance with international juvenile justice standards and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. From the moment of arrest, all operations and procedures should follow all of the recommendations made by Defence for Children Palestine, including that detention must only be used as a last resort and only for the shortest appropriate time. Children must not be subjected to physical or psychological violence. Children must have access to legal consultation and parents prior to and during interrogations. Children must only be arrested during daylight hours. Children must be properly informed of their right to silence. Children must not be blindfolded or painfully restrained. Children must not be subjected to coercive force or threats. Children must not be transferred out of the West Bank in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. The full recommendations of Defence for Children Palestine. Each year, the Israeli military detains and prosecutes around 700 Palestinian children under Israeli military detention. Palestinian children as young as 12 are routinely taken from their homes in nighttime raids at gunpoint, blindfolded, bound and shackled, interrogated without a lawyer or relative and no audio-visual recording, put into solitary confinement, forced to sign confessions, often in Hebrew, a language they do not understand. Israel is the only country in the world to automatically prosecute children in family courts that lack basic safeguards for a fair trial. And from the moment of arrest, Palestinian children encounter ill treatment, torture at the hands of Israeli forces. 3 out of 4 experience physical violence during arrest or interrogation. And we believe that the New Zealand government must make a public statement about the measures it will take to put pressure on the Israeli government and to end the ill treatment of Palestinian detainees. Kia ora.